They actually have a program where they feed feral cats. They kind of roam the campus and they feed them and take care of them. And it's called iCats, and people find out about that and you want to give money to the cats, right?
Thank you for tuning in to today's Land and Everything Else podcast. You are in for a real treat today. I'm getting the chance to talk to Dr. Jennifer Lehman, JD, CFP, CAP, PhD, just amazingly qualified, and director of the Wallace Chair of Learning and Professionalism and Philanthropy at the American College. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me today.
Man, when I met you at the Dallas FPA conference, immediate chemistry, I was like, this is going to be awesome. And I'm so excited to talk with you today. Mm-hmm. So could you share with our group, what is the CAP designation? Because I think it's so important in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. So CAP is Chartered Advisor in Philanthropy. It is a 3-course graduate level professional designation offered by the American College of Financial Services. And it's a program unique to us. I mean, there are other colleges and universities that have philanthropy, but not this exact designation and course combination. So the 3 courses in a nutshell, there's planning for impact in the context of family wealth. So a lot of that is having these difficult conversations for one, right? I mean, and this could be a whole topic in and of itself, but just, people generally don't want to talk about their demise. So how do you bring those things up? And then the importance of multi-generational conversations and basically some tips on raising responsible kids. If you're, basically it's a lot of times the wealth is gone in 3 generations. So like, how do you make it last? And the ones that do make it last, what do they do? Also, for more complex planning situations, where is your seat at the table and who's leading? All right, so it's that sort of thing in that course. And then there's charitable giving strategies. That's the most technical course. We sort of nickname that one taxes and tools. Right, so that's where we get into, of course, alts, or non-cash assets in general, DAFs, the different charitable remainder trusts, foundations, things like that. And then, of course, what the tax benefits and implications are, because, of course, there are a lot of tax benefits to these different vehicles. And cash is good, too, but really the non-cash assets are better for a lot of different ways. And, of course, that's some of what we're going to get into today. But then the 3rd course is gift planning in a nonprofit context. So that's more of a focus on working effectively with a board of directors and running a nonprofit. But it's information that's used. It also is trends in philanthropy. So who's giving, right? What percentage comes from individuals, foundations, bequests, corporations, that sort of thing. And while the focus is on how to run a nonprofit, there are things that are useful for any different professional, because I do also want to say regarding the CAP program that we get a mix of estate planning attorneys, CPAs, CFPs, some insurance professionals, and then, of course, the nonprofit professionals. And we started as really an insurance college and have branched from that. So it's an interesting mix of students in the CAP program. And the average student is in their 40s, and they're working professionals, and they just want to either do a better job running their nonprofit or feel more confident in the conversations. But also if it's a situation where they have clients, maybe they want to feel more confident in the advice that they're giving for the ones that are philanthropically minded.
And I think that's what ties CAP into talking a little bit in the land space. And first off, I'll also say that while other universities may have something in philanthropy, honestly, I think, CAP is so developed now, and it's just really an amazing designation. And so I would encourage people that are in that space to pursue it. And I think that's very important. I'd like to talk a little bit about landowners with you. We've seen appreciation in farmland in the Midwest and in row crops, and also in some permanent crops. We've seen a lot of institutional money coming into that space. And what that's done is created a lot of sort of millionaire, multi-millionaire, multi-millionaire clients, but that live day to day and have a cash flow, to that end. The first kind of CAP related question I'd have for you, can you provide some framework on, I'm a farmer and I'm older. And I never intended for it to wind up this way, but let's say my land's 10, 20, $30 million of this liquid big asset. I've got some kids that farm, some that don't farm, maybe some that have gone and pursued professional paths, and others that still farm with me. How do we start to have conversations with kids? Just, from that end, like, how do we start having these conversations about generational wealth and how transparent are we? And I'd love to just kind of, go back and forth with you on that. I'm curious where to start those, because I know that first CAP class really can dig into that.
Yeah. And, I'd say one thing that's really important is to not try to do all of those conversations on your own, right? That's where some sort of philanthropic advisor that can lead the conversations and really be more neutral, right, is helpful. But of course, somebody needs to bring it up that, hey, we want to start having these meetings, right? So it's more so nobody's caught off guard, right? As I'm doing my legacy planning, I want everyone to ideally be on board with what I'm doing. But if you're not on board, at least you understand what I'm doing and why, and what role you can play and how we can all work together in this. Because like you said, just to give an example, let's say they have 3 kids, and one of them is like, well, maybe I'd run the farm, but I don't want to run it by myself. But then the other 2 siblings are like, heck no, I'm not doing that, right? I'm moving to a big city when I'm 18 and not coming back, whatever it is, right? Sure. So that, it's important to know these things and plan accordingly. And then maybe the one that's like, well, I want to run it, maybe you can find somebody else to run it with them, and then you make the plans based on that. And then you still have to work out what seems fair to everybody for, if you give it to that one kid, then, what about the other ones? But maybe they're like, well, it's really not that important. The last thing you want to do is not talk about it and then give them this, what's supposed to be a pleasant surprise that, hey, you got this land, but then they're like, well, what do we do with it? And yeah, if it's worth that much and they sell it, that's not so bad either. But of course, there's capital gains and all those other things. Potentially, although if it's, let me make a quick distinction right now. If the land is given during somebody's life, they get that person's basis. So if they bought it for $100,000 and it's now worth $10 million, it's the basis is the $100,000, right? So that person bought it for. If it's given at death, then they get the date of death basis. Yeah. So then they could sell it and not have capital gains. So that, that is, I didn't want to leave that unsaid. But still that, there's a lot of things to be talked through. So I think bringing in that professional that can help navigate, and it's going to be more than one meeting. And then even after things are pretty well settled, most of the time they want to follow up annually to check in.
How do I prepare for that conversation? Let's say that I am an investment advisor. I am a trusted, partner. I work with the owner of the wealth. How do I prepare for a conversation with kids? What do I want to do ahead of time? What information do I want to gather? How might I want to prep parents? I mean, what kind of thoughts do you have in that area? Because I know that's something that I think we get a little anxious around a lot of the
Yeah.
time, and we, don't want to do more harm than good.
Sure.
How do we prepare for those conversations?
Yeah, I would say part of it depends on if you've got these multiple family members that are your clients, or is it just, let's say it's the married couple that owns the farmland and they're your clients, but they still want to have the conversations with their kids. In that case, you're, at least to start, getting info largely from the parents. But you're still, in that first meeting may just be around robin, talk about, what are your life goals? Where do you see yourself in 5 and 10 years? And, would you have an interest in running the farm if it were presented to you? And, things like that. So you don't always have to know everything ahead of time, because, I think that, if you gather all of that and then, let's say you're reading it back and it's like, oh, well, John doesn't want the farm. What do you mean John doesn't want the farm? Right. So it might be better. Right. It's always going to be like a little bit awkward if they're assuming John wants the farm. But, if you're sitting there in the room together and it comes up that, well, I'm not sure how to tell you this, Mom and Dad, but I'm not sure I want the farm. Right. That's probably better than, again, like here, I've got the different intake forms from everybody. Let me summarize them. Right. So, yeah. I hate to say on the spot, because obviously you're doing prep with.
No, but I think my takeaways from that are not to assume and don't make assumptions. Be ready for some flexibility. And, that reinforced message you said early on, having the conversation now is always going to be, important, as opposed to someone passing away without having the conversation.
Right. Absolutely.
And I think that's like the key, that I got out of that messaging is it's important for us to have these conversations. It's important for us not to make assumptions, but we need to have them and as objective as we can be. I think that's and as well trained as we can get to that end too.
Right.
On that end. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's extraordinarily powerful. And I'd like to kind of then step in a further direction. So let's say we have landowners or we have real estate owners, something to the extent where I have some appreciated physical property, albeit land or real estate or an apartment building or directly owned physical assets, not a REIT or mutual fund. When do I start thinking about, okay, I'm just going to give these assets to a willing charity? And I guess I really don't know the answer here. How do we decide, does a charity want this apartment building? Does a charity want this tract of land? Like, how do we have that conversation with the charity? I don't think I've ever thought of that quite before.
Yeah, that's, I'd say the advice I have to the charities is don't just accept every donation that someone wants to give you. However, you also don't want to be too quick to say, oh, we've never done that before. I don't think we can handle that. Right. I mean, there's a balance in there. Like, think through it, and maybe it's, if it's, let's say it's something like an apartment complex, right? That's going to be not an easy thing to run and manage, right? I mean, maybe if it's donated to the charity, they could turn around and sell it perhaps.
Yes.
Which is probably what they'd want to do, but there's still, it's probably not going to sell tomorrow, right? So
there's a liability. In
some markets, maybe it would, but
there's a liability and maintenance end of it, sure.
But let's say it takes a while, so then you're a landlord, right? Is that really what you want to do? Is like the executive director or what have you, of a nonprofit, is be a landlord? And of course, I've heard all kinds of stories. I think my favorite one was it was a single family home and an elderly guy that died, and there was a trustee managing it while all the probate stuff was going on. And there were mice living in the couch.
Oh, no.
And various other, that was the condition of it. So it's, obviously it's not something they can rent out right away. There's a lot of work that has to be done, or, you're hiring to get it done. Most of these real estate things, really all of them, are going to need an appraisal, right? So there's steps that have to be taken. But I'll say for the charity, keep in mind that there are entities out there like Charitable Solutions that Brian Klontz owns, that you can hire them to help you with the process. There's also, sometimes they work with the donor that maybe a community foundation can accept it, and it goes into a donor advised fund, and then it can be directed out to various charities that way. So there are some potentially like creative solutions beyond I have to take the gift and figure out how to deal with it on my own. Right?
That is an interesting idea in thinking of it at scale, right? So the University of Illinois is a very large landowner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to things like soybean and corn, we have relationships to farm that land and direct those things.
Yeah.
But when I think of like, a local food bank, that's not somewhere where 100 acres makes too much sense. So I think to that end, I love the idea there of having conversations and thinking, do I want to be a landlord? And if not, that element.
Right.
So to that, I'd kind of move just into crypto for a minute or two. I think 10 years ago, if I said I was going to leave Bitcoin to charity, I think all of us would scratch our heads a little bit. But today, you've got appreciated Bitcoin and digital currency.
Mm-hmm.
In your experience with CAP, how have you seen the appetite for, we've got this crypto I'd like to give? Is that something that's happening, or we're not quite there yet, or are people positioned to take that?
Yeah, it's I think it's a great question that I've been, thinking about and asking around about, and I'll say it's still slow in coming. I mean, there's some interest in it. There are entities like Giving Block that help solicit those donations and convert it to cash right away and all that good stuff. So if a charity wanted to do it, again, you have to pay them, but there are ways to get help, and usually it does increase their donations. It tends to be, for now, just the trend is it's younger men wanting to donate the crypto. Obviously, there's always exceptions to the, but that's the the general trend. And what's sort of interesting about that is to me at least, is overall with charitable giving, it's single, childless, older women that give the most.
Okay.
All right. So what's the message in that? These 20-something males that maybe aren't giving to charity yet, if the charity is set up to accept crypto and they can advertise it in a way that people find that out, then that would likely increase their donations. But it, like anything, it's a process. And I mean, working at it's a wonderful university, but it's still, you've got your different layers of approval that you need for things. And all it takes is, one person that's, that is part of the approval process. It's like, are you crazy? We're not going there.
Yeah.
And then you're not going there for a little while, right? So that's really the biggest obstacle I see right now. And I do still think it's a little bit of a niche area. I mean, I don't think it's something where a charity should, or a university or what, should hire a fundraiser focused on crypto. I mean, we're probably not quite to that point yet, but having that as part of somebody's job to get it going, I think would yield some good results.
Oh, I agree entirely. And I think, with things like crypto, you're looking at large appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with large appreciation comes a real incentive to say, well, that I don't need this asset to live per se. Let's say, if I'm going to donate an asset, a highly appreciated asset is definitely going to be preference as far as what I'm donating. I don't have to pay the gains and then turn around and, donate after the fact.
Right.
So I think, there's a future there, as long as the market continues to, accept and evolve with things like Bitcoin, then I think there's definitely a future in that space.
Sure.
I had a question I've been meaning to ask, and I really don't know the answer, so I'd love to chat with you on it. We talk about giving and we going kind of back to, real estate or farm families or ag families. And, at what point in the game am I looking at giving to something like a donor advice fund or charitable fund? At what point in the game am I starting to think, well, maybe there could be a legacy foundation? Is there sort of a break-even point there where I think, okay, I've got $5 million, maybe I could create the Lemoyne Foundation or something? Or are we starting to see charitable and donor advised type giving, in larger amounts? I'd love to get your thoughts on the world right now in that space.
Yeah, and that is a good question to ask. And we're seeing the donor advised fund giving increasing pretty significantly, and not quite as many new foundations popping up. And of course, a big part of that is the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that raised the standard deduction so significantly. So fewer people are itemizing, right? So generally, if you're giving, let's say before then, somebody gave, $5,000 a year to charity, and they could deduct some of it because their standard deduction was lower than that. So it's worth itemizing, especially if they have other things they're also itemizing. Maybe they've got the mortgage interest, or, I don't wish medical expenses on anybody, but they are deductible if they're high enough, right? So, they've got, something like that. But then you get a standard deduction of, we'll call it 13,000. And, so that doesn't work with the 5,000, right? You're still going to be taking the standard deduction. You're not getting any tax break from that deduction, from that donation, I mean. So what you could do is front load 3 or 4 years worth of donations if you've got the liquidity, right? So year one, you put in $20,000 to a donor advised fund. You take that charitable deduction in that year, so it's worth itemizing that year. But then you still dole out $5,000 a year to the charities of your choice. Years 2, 3, and 4, you're taking standard deduction again, right? And then you do that all over again. So that's a big reason for the increase in the donations into donor advised funds. In terms of what minimal dollar amount where it's worth having a foundation, I don't really have a magic number on that. I mean, it's clear it's going to be millions. I mean, it's not something that, I've got $100,000, let me start a foundation, because you've got, of course, the legal expenses, the setup costs, and then the management, and all those other things. And then, of course, you're required to pay out at least 5% a year of that. So, you're going to not spend it down to zero, but it's going to get pretty insignificant at some point if it's not earning money at the same time. So and it's a lot to run, but it can make sense if let's say it's a fairly large family, with a lot of offspring, and it's a good way to get all of them involved. Those can be good jobs. And of course, you need the attorney, you need the accountant. It's not just the people figuring out how to give money away, right? You've got different roles that you need. So those can really be some pretty cool jobs. And it can cover expenses for like an annual retreat, if, in Jackson Hole, some nice places like that. So there are some, clear advantages to having it. But again, it's really, I would be inclined to say, several million to make it worthwhile. Okay. And again, hopefully for the right reasons, because like I said, it is just going to be a lot to set up and manage. So it's not just, what a cool way to get the family together in Jackson Hole, right? Right. There are other ways to do that if that's really all you want.
Well, I love that answer. And I'd like to ask you kind of a general question for our audience. What trends are you and your fellow CAP seeing in philanthropy, with the Tax Act, possibly the modification or changes of that act? And What have you seen as trends? Anything exciting that's going on right now in the world of philanthropy? I'd love to kind of get just kind of real open-ended thoughts on that.
Yeah, a few different things. There's, for one, bequest giving. So that's right in somebody's will, leaving stuff to charity. That has stayed right around 10% of
Okay.
overall giving over time. The percentage for individual giving is down from like 10 years ago. It's still way higher than corporate giving, but foundation giving has increased. Even though I said we're not necessarily creating a whole bunch of new ones, but just they're doing more, and we've got our people are realizing more and more how beneficial their community foundations are. So of course they can donate more if they take in more, right? So there's some of that going on, but as a percentage of overall giving, right, the individual giving is dropping over time. And it actually would have been a bigger drop if it weren't for Mackenzie Scott, who almost single-handedly, kept it at a reasonably high level. And a lot of that, get more and more of that individual giving is from ultra high net worth households. And it's always been a little more skewed that way, but it seems to be getting more and more skewed that way. So that, of course, raises questions for, and I don't want to put all of the focus on people that work as fundraisers, but, it does raise some questions for people working as fundraisers, because we know that, if you can get one huge donation, it can make a huge, very big difference in, what you're able to do. But it also means if you're counting on one major donor, let's say you've got one major donor that gives a significant amount every year, but then something happens that they pull out, that would be devastating. So, there's always that balance of, if we get that one, it would be amazing, but then we don't want to count too much on just one. So things like annual gifts are a little more of a volume business, right? You're getting a bunch of, let's say at a university, right? You're getting a bunch of people to pay like $30 for their annual alumni dues or what have you, and it's still, you're not going to be able to endow a faculty chair, but it can still make a difference. And then it's also interesting to me just to see kind of what people latch on to, right? Like the job I had before my current one was at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. I was director of planned giving. They actually have a program where they feed feral cats, and so they're still outside, but those, they kind of roam the campus, and they feed them and take care of them, and it's called iCats, and people find out about that and want to give money to the cats, right? So then sometimes it's like, okay, we love cats too, but we have this other,
right?
We have this, this marine life research center that could really use, some more funding right now, and so, but the point is, if there's somebody that cares about your organization and wants to give, find out why they care about it. And maybe there's, we're not out to talk people into doing what they wouldn't otherwise do, but there may be some way to better accomplish that organization's mission while still meeting the donors' charitable goals. And, the same goes if you're the estate planning attorney or the CPA or the CFP, right, that's got a client with these ideas, right? Sometimes they come in thinking one thing, and that's not so practical.
So I'd like to pivot on that and kind of one last bigger question for you and thought. Let's say that I'm coming from a farming family. I'm coming from a real estate perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have a philanthropic interest, and I'd like to give. I know I've got more wealth than my family needs right now, and I'm looking down the line. Who should I talk to? How do I start the conversation? Just from a client consumer standpoint, what do I need to do to start, and what kind of people should I look for to talk to and work with?
I would say a good start is a financial advisor that's equipped in philanthropic advising as well. Right. So you don't necessarily want to find the CFP that's really good at finding tax breaks, but doesn't care about charity. Right. So,
Sure.
the CFP that cares about charity can help, get the conversation started and navigate some of those things. And, that also brings up, like, one of the things that'll come up a lot of times is, oh, well, I'm just going to leave it to my kids, and sometimes that's fine. Again, we're not out to, like, oh no, you really don't want to do that, right? I mean, it's up to
Sure.
them, but just to make sure they're fully informed with what they're really doing, right? The default might be, oh, I'm just going to leave it all to my kids. Oh, really? Well, how much money do you think that's going to be? Well, what do you think they would do with it? Right. And then as they, and maybe you go through all that and it's like, okay, cool, sign here, right? But it may be like, oh, well, yeah, that's $20 million. And oh, yeah, they're going to quit work and be bums. I don't think I want to do that after all, right? Okay, maybe and we all know the example of, like, Warren Buffett, his kids are going to get $1 million apiece. And granted, that's more than a lot of us get, but I mean, that's such a tiny fraction of
Sure.
what he's worth, and they know that ahead of time, what they're getting. But just something else I want to bring up. It's I don't have a pat answer for, do you tell the kids the dollar amount? It's really up to each family. I mean, sometimes they just want to say, well, it's a lot, so we've set it up in a trust, and you're going to get a certain amount at age 25 and 35 and 45, or, we set it up where you apply every year for certain amounts and the trustee approve, I mean, again, there are lots of different ways to do it. And you can, explain why you're doing it. Other times they do say the amount, hey, you're each getting 2 million and I'm going to dole it out this way. It's really a lot, so here's how I hope you spend it. Or, hey, just take it. I trust you.
Well, I think that's an important aspect, and I'm sure a lot of culture goes into that, a lot of background history, family patterns, behavior, cognitive biases.
Mhm.
And I think all of that goes into, conversations around wealth and wealth transferring and death, right? Which is
Yeah.
part of that conversation that can be tough. And I really have enjoyed our conversation, getting into those elements today and talking, about how philanthropy plays in. And my very last question for you then, I'm an advisor, and I'd like to start to have conversations with my clients about giving. Maybe through that, the type of client I'm working with may change or evolve. Walk me through where do I go to learn more about CAP, and how do I sign up for that?
Yeah, our website is theamericancollege.edu and then /CAP for a CAP program. So that's an easy way to do that. You can also always reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn or, the college page. So you do at least have to remember theamericancollege.edu. And then sometimes, just in terms of your practice, I would say the first thing to look at is your client intake form, and make sure there's a question on there about, are there, and look at how it's worded, like, are there charitable clauses that you care about, or something like that, rather than, like, do you have, or not having it on there at all and waiting for them to bring it up.
Right.
Or, do you have charity as part of your plan? And they say no, so you don't talk about charity, right? Make it, again, don't force it if they don't want it, but make it where it's, if they hadn't thought about it, maybe they do go ahead and think about it. Because one of the other trends I've seen is lifetime, pretty generous lifetime giving, but amongst the people that give during their lifetime, only 10% of them give at their death.
Wow.
Okay. So, I mean, these are people that are charitably inclined. I mean, they're giving gifts to charity while they're alive. So what are the reasons they don't give at their death? A lot of times it's something they didn't really think about it as an option. Sometimes it's not a real large amount that they have left, so they want it to go to their kids. But I think a lot of times just nobody asked them or they didn't know it was an option. So again, just making sure they know it's an option and then they decide if they want it or not.
Well, thank you so much for this thoughtful conversation today. I got a lot out of it, and I really appreciate you sharing your time with us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks again for having me.